Hi everyone, welcome to our discussion about the sixth aspect of the creative process. So remember, we've looked at the creative process as this heroic journey, right? And you simplified it even more by saying some aspect of the creative process includes order, right? You have your ordinary world in which things have their place, which there's structure, which you know right and wrong and good and bad and the correct way to do something and the incorrect way of doing something. There's a very clear-cut sense of the right approach to problems, right? This is what we've been taught as we've grown up. This is the ordinary world where there's a very clear sense of order. But in order to create, we have to enter an aspect of disorder where we tear down everything that we had learned and that was conditioned into us from the ordinary world. So the bulk of the creative process, as we've looked at it so far, answering the call, entering the sea of possibilities, the trial and tribulations, finding new ideas, entering the darkened cave and retrieving the reward, these are all different parts of this disorder aspect of the creative process, where you go from knowing something to not knowing something. And it's through that disorder that you have the freedom to try new things and then eventually reorder in order to create something new, right? So the sixth aspect deals with the reordering. It deals with all the creative ideas and the creative insights and the playing and exploring you did and the disorder aspect of it all. You take all of that and you put it all together in a new way, right? And this is what we refer to as return home, because you are bringing home this new, the manifestation of your new creative idea. So think about your projects and how you may be feeling as if you have all of these ideas but are unable to put it together. One way to think about this is that this reordering aspect of the creative process, right, the return home, is about integration. It's about taking what we've learned in the past, taking the creativity and the new ideas that we've gained by venturing out beyond our ordinary world and recombining them, using both in order to manifest your creative idea. In terms of your life, right, you probably have an ordinary world in which there's a certain sense of who you think you are or how to live your life, and that at some point you are going to venture out beyond that to explore and learn new things about yourself, about life. Now, that ordinary idea of you in life, that has to be integrated with what you've explored, this exploratory side and this playful side, and whatever you learn from that has to be put together with who you were, what life was like prior, in order to create this new you, right? The difficulty is that there's this tension. There's this tension to want to go back to the usual and ordered life, and there's this pull to to explore and be playful and try something different. And for a lot of us, it's hard to maintain that tension. I mean, just see different people who represent these sorts of aspects, those that really want order, and then those that want complete freedom, and they value exploring more than they value stability, right? And how these sorts of people get conflict. Well, that's not just something external to us. I mean, that describes what goes on within us too. There's a part of us that wants to feel safe, that wants things to be clear, that doesn't like ambiguity. And there's another side of us that wants freedom, that wants to play and explore and try new things. Well, both of those are within us, so they're both tugging at our attention and tugging at our motivations. And for a lot of us, it's difficult, and we end up not integrating. So maybe this is how you feel right now with your projects. It's just I can't hold all my ideas together. There's so much stuff in my head. I'm just really confused. And as a result of that, you may lack energy to do anything, right? So if you're unable to integrate those things and hold that tension, you may be feeling this right now with your projects, or you may be feeling this about your life. So many things for me to do, so many ways of me of living it. I'm not too sure what the best way is. I don't want to waste my time doing the wrong thing for myself, having the wrong career, being with the wrong person. That you just can't take it all in your head. It's just too messy, and maybe that drains you, and you just want to like lie down on your couch and play video games and not think about it anymore, right? Or just think about any sort of difficulty in life, whether it's with roommates, right? Dealing with roommates, or dealing with your family, or dealing with your job, and there may be a part of you that just wants to give up and quit. It's like, forget this all, right? Or maybe you're in that anxious mode where you just can't handle it in your head. Well, is it no wonder then that there are lots of people who are famously known as being creative who severely struggle with these sorts of experiences? One of the stereotypes of creative types is to say, well, they suffer from some sort of a mental health issue. And when we go through various famous creative people, sometimes people say, look, they all seem to have some sort of issue with depression or some sort of issue with anxiety, right? Here's just a list of people, but I'm sure you are familiar with pop culture icons and various musicians and various actors and actresses that you follow that have some sort of mental health issue. In some sense, it makes sense that these sorts of creative people would have difficulty for the same reason we said many of us might be having difficulty with the sixth aspect, right? There's a part of us that wants to explore. We like the freedom of trying new things, but that's very chaotic. Now, how do you wrangle that in? How do you hold the tension between being this divergent thinking, free associating mind and with what you need to do to focus and make those ideas come to life? That's a tension that's not so easy to resolve, right? So in your head, just think about certain people that you know in popular culture, whether it's musicians and actors and actresses, creative artists that deal with mental health issues. Can you see the parallel here and how they may be feeling, or why they may be feeling these things, especially because they're very creative? Okay, so there are two things that happen to us, and there's two things that prevent us they provide us difficulty with the return home, right? Bringing your ideas to life. And they both stem from possibly the body's desire to conserve resources, right? Because we are efficient. Our body wants to be efficient. If it has a certain amount of energy, it doesn't want to waste it all. Because if you think back to your ancestors and living out in the wild, we needed to be efficient at life, right? We needed to, if we have a certain amount of energy because we don't have immediate access to sugars and carbohydrates and all these sorts of things, so we better conserve our energy and only use it when necessary. So as a result, we may have developed the ability to think efficiently, right? Using heuristics and shortcuts, something we learned about with the first aspect. But obviously, if thinking efficiently means thinking quickly, and thinking quickly isn't always the best thing for us, and actually make us even more chaotic. It may make our thought process a little bit more hectic because we're not thinking carefully about what we should do and when. Okay, so the second thing that you may be feeling right now is just a lack of motivation, a lack of energy to do something. And this can be attributed to having efficient behaviors. Our bodies will often take the path of least effort, right? We'll just do whatever we have the energy to do right now. And if you don't have the energy right now to do your homework, well, then you might not want to do your homework. This could explain a lot of procrastination, right? Because once you get close to the deadline, then that energy builds up, and now you have energy to do whatever it is you have to do. So two different issues here. The first one with efficient thinking is that because we don't think carefully about all of our ideas and how to best approach getting to where we want to go, our ideas just get all muddled, and we end up experiencing psychic disorder of our minds. The second problem is that because we have efficient behaviors, and we usually take the path of least effort or whatever has the most juice for us at the time, we're often prone to complacency. So maybe now, as you're thinking about your projects, maybe these are the biggest issues for you, right? Maybe you have lots of ideas, but just don't have the juice to do anything about it, or just don't have a grasp on a good approach or a handle on what to do with your ideas, right? So it makes no wonder why you may be feeling this way, or that there are certain points in your life where you go through ordeals and struggles and you feel like this. You feel like there's too much in your head to handle, right? So why does this feel this way? Why does it feel like, why do you ever experience psychic disorder? Well, think about this puzzle that I had you do. I mean, think about all the thoughts and ideas in your head, like all these puzzle pieces. I mean, why is it hard to put together this puzzle? It's chaotic, right? There's no clear sense of how they all fit. There's no easy way of determining what pieces go where. So what do you end up doing? You end up just kind of trial and error, just kind of fitting stuff together oftentimes, don't you? I mean, why else would this be hard? It's because we're not thinking carefully about a strategy, perhaps, on how to do these. If you have done jigsaw puzzles before in your past, you may have learned certain strategies, certain approaches to how to best tackle a puzzle, and then you may implement those strategies to effectively go through and solve it. But if you have never experienced this, if you have never gone through and learned strategies, well, then it's just looking at the puzzle pieces just seems like it's just a big mess, just like ideas in our head are a big mess, right? So what would it mean to think carefully? Well, think about what would be necessary, or what would be a good strategy here to put puzzle pieces together. Well, one, it might be useful to get some sort of structure established. All right, so maybe you start to get all the edges of the frame of the puzzle, right? And you can take a look at pieces and you can see if they have a long straight edge as opposed to one of the I don't know what you call these things, one of the sides with a protruding piece, right? You get all the straight edges and you find all the straight edges and you see if you can line them all up to get a frame. That's a strategy. And then with that, you can start to fill in the middle of it. And how do you do that? Well, you might start to pile up pieces that kind of have similar colors, right? Because if they have similar colors, there's a good chance they might be placed next to each other somehow. So you might put different piles with different similar colors. But notice that we're able to move because we have some sort of strategy. We're able to move because we've thought carefully, maybe, of how to approach organizing the puzzle pieces. Well, how often do you do that with your ideas? How often do you strategize getting a structure for your ideas? How often do you strategize putting your ideas together, in certain ways to make sense out of them in order to figure out logically which one should go first and which one should go next, and which, what the order is that you should do all of these ideas, which ones maybe you should just throw away because they're not useful. How often do you think carefully about that? Well, we've learned about how we thought or how we think, right? When we discussed the first aspect of the creative process. But I'm going to give you a survey to remind you about the natural way in which human beings think. Okay, so we're going to go through various survey questions. And on a piece of paper, I want you to write down your answers to the survey. Okay, and later write them down because I'll be asking you for all of them in a second. So have them all with you on a piece of paper. Okay, so on your paper, put survey number 1, and then write your answer to this question. Let's pretend you're a physician. And I'm going to tell you the following. A new medical procedure has a death rate of 7% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? Okay, so what would you say? A new medical procedure has a death rate of 7% within 5 years. Yes or no? Would you recommend it to patients? So just to give you some more background, maybe this is a way in which the hospital can do the procedure that costs maybe a little bit less, right? But either way, this was actually a literal survey given to physicians, so I should probably not give you much context and give it to you as it was given to them. A new medical procedure has a death rate of 7% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? Yes or no for number 1? Okay. Number 2, which one would you buy? Okay, so the first option is you'd buy their textbook for a class. So let's say you take one of my classes and there's a required textbook. It costs $59. Or would you buy the textbook and workbook? So there's a textbook plus there's a workbook that has sample questions, sample problems, and exercises that you can go through to get ready for exams. Would you buy that textbook and workbook for $125? Okay, so for survey number 2, write number 1 or number 2 option. Okay, survey number 3, you go to the bookstore. At the bookstore, you see the, oh, by the way, the workbook here is not required, right? The only thing that's required is the textbook. Survey number 3. Okay, so you go to the bookstore, you see the required textbook for $25. Okay, there's a person next to you that just got a phone call from his friend. His friend is at the bookstore down the street, and his friend says, hey, I found the textbook. I found the textbook for only $15. Would you buy the textbook at the bookstore you're at right now for $25, which is option 1, or would you drive 15 minutes away and buy the textbook for $15? Okay, so for survey number 3, put number 1 or option number 2. Okay, survey number 4. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, particularly women's issues, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Okay, so there's a little outline of Linda. I want you to rank the following possibilities from most likely to least likely of being true. A, Linda is a teacher in an elementary school. B, Linda is active in the feminist movement. C, Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. D, Linda is a bank teller. So I want you to write down A, B, C, D, but in the order from what you think is most likely to least likely. Okay, so you start with the letter that you think is most likely. So if you think D is most likely, you put D first, followed by the next letter, followed by the next letter, followed by the last letter. Okay, so we're going to flip a coin 7 times. Okay, so it's an independent coin. It's not weighted in any way. Which of the following scenarios do you think is most likely? Do you think that the first option is most likely? That it'll turn up heads, 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 then tails, tails, tails? Do you think the second option is most likely? It'll turn up tails, then heads, heads, then tails, then heads, then tails, tails? Or do you think the third option is more likely? That you'll have 7 flips that give you 7 straight tails. Okay, so number 1, number 2, number 3. Which is most likely, do you think? Survey number 6, which one would you buy? Okay, so you go to the bookstore, you see your textbook for $54. Okay, required textbook. You see the workbook that's not required, but has lots of practice problems, practice exercises to get you ready for the exams. That costs $120. Or the bookstore has a package deal, right? You buy both the textbook and the workbook, also for $120. Which one would you buy? Option 1, option 2, or option 3? Okay, survey number 7, which one would you buy? You're trying to get ready for an interview. Maybe it's a college interview. You want to impress the admissions office, or it's an interview for a job, so you want to impress your boss or potential boss. So you look for a suit to wear. You go to the store. You see your suit, the suit that you really want to wear. They think is perfect for you for $455. But then you get a call from somebody, a friend of yours who's shopping for you at the same time, or maybe it's your parent shopping for you at the same time. They send you a picture of what they found. It's the exact same suit, right? They don't have the money to buy it, but you can drive over there. You can drive over there. It's only 15 minutes away and buy it for $445. Which one would you do? Would you buy the suit right now where you're at for $455, or would you drive 15 minutes away and buy the same suit for $445? Okay, option 1 or option 2. Survey number 8, yes or no. Again, let's pretend you're a physician and you're asked the following. A new medical procedure has a survival rate of 93% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? Yes or no? A new medical procedure has a survival rate of 93% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? Again, possibly it's a way for the hospital to not pay for an expensive procedure, right? Same sort of procedure, just maybe done a little bit with equipment that's not so expensive, possibly. Okay, yes or no? Survey number 9. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, particularly women's issues, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Okay, so same outline of Linda. Again, I want you to rank the following from from most likely to least likely. A, Linda is a teacher in an elementary school. B, Linda is a bank teller. C, Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. D, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay, think about this. Now, what we're going to show, right, is that oftentimes when we make decisions, make choices about what to do next or about what to think, we often do it out of some sort of psychological impulse, right? Oftentimes emotion, as opposed to reason. A lot of us maybe pride ourselves in being rational. We think carefully about issues, right? And we can maybe even justify it in our own heads why our belief makes sense to us. But it turns out, even if you think that, it doesn't mean it's true. That a lot of our decision making is a result of the psychological impulse, oftentimes emotion. You can even call it intuition rather than reason. Okay, so let's take a look. Surveys 4 and 9. So I wanted you to write down all of your responses to the surveys. So hopefully you have that in front of you. Survey number 4 and 9. Okay, so here is Linda. Again, Linda's a 31-year-old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy, a student. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, particularly women's issues, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. And I gave you 2 different surveys for this. Right, and I asked you to rank these possibilities from most likely to least likely. Okay, so let's take a look at what you circled or what your ranking was for survey number 4. Okay, so how many of you thought she was it was, in terms of most likely, how many of you thought A was most likely? How many of you thought B was most likely? How many of you thought C was most likely? And how many of you thought D was most likely? Oftentimes when we do this in class, B is often on the top more so than the other responses, like Linda is active in the feminist movement. For survey number 9, similar options, but not exactly the same. Okay. A, Linda is a teacher in an elementary school. B, Linda is a bank teller. C, Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. D, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay, so oftentimes in class, option D is often at the top for what people think is most likely to be true about Linda. Does that make sense that D for survey number 9 would be most likely? Well, think about this. B says Linda is a bank teller. D says Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Just between those two, which is most likely to be true? That somebody is a bank teller or that somebody is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? Well, let's put it this way. How many bank tellers are there? So let's pretend like there's 1,000 bank tellers in the world. Okay, let's just pretend 1,000 bank tellers. How many of those people are also active in the feminist movement? Well, it's going to be less than 1,000, right? It's going to be less than 1,000. So if you think logically about statistics, you have a greater chance of being a bank teller, just a bank teller, than you do of being a bank teller that's also active in the feminist movement. Can you see how statistically that makes sense? Imagine the population of people. Okay, so let's take a look at a random city. Okay, so let's say San Jose. Let's say there are 100,000 people in San Jose. Let's say 500 of them are bank tellers. So the chance of being a bank teller in San Jose is 500 over 100,000. Okay, 500 over 100,000. If we take a look at the people who are bank tellers and also active in the feminist movement, is that more or less, you think, than 500? Well, there's less than 500. Because if there's 500 bank tellers, there's going to be less than that who are also members of the active in the feminist movement, right? Even if the majority of bank tellers are active in the feminist movement, it's still not going to be 500. It might even be 400 over 100,000. So you have a greater chance of being a bank teller than you do of being a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement. Statistically, B should have been much higher than D. But why did we think D? Why didn't we think logically about it? Why didn't we think statistically about it? It's the same reason why many of us here, probably for number 5, said 2 was most likely. Well, if you know anything about statistics, can you figure out what the chances are for any of these? Statistically speaking, they are all equally likely. Number 1 has the same chance of happening as number 2, which has the same chance of happening as number 3. Mathematically, how do you figure this out? Well, a couple things. You can list out all the possibilities for 7 flips, right? The chance of number 1 happening is 1 out of the total number of possibilities for 7 flips. What's the chance of number 2 happening? Well, 1 out of the total possibilities for 7 flips, right? So it's the same probability. You can think of it this way too. To figure out the probability of this event happening, you multiply the chance that H happens times the chance that H happens times the chance that H happens. Well, each of those heads, each of those are a half, right? Because either heads or tails. So it'd be a half times 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 a half. Well, that's the same thing for the next one, and it's the same thing for the next one. So they all have the same chance of occurring. But why did a lot of us think it was number 2? Why did a lot of us think Linda was active in the feminist movement? So much so that it blinded us from doing the actual statistics, from thinking rationally about it and realizing, well, B has to be way more probable than D for number 9. Well, it turns out that we often fall prey to an availability bias, also known as a representative bias. This is when we assign higher probabilities to events that more closely resemble what we think about most often, or what we're most often exposed to, right? So if you are exposed to images or stories of women who fall under that Linda description, I bet you a lot of those stories or images from movies or TV shows often has that sort of woman active in the feminist movement, right? When you flip coins, how often do you ever get like 7 straight heads or 7 straight tails? It doesn't really happen that often. When you flip your coins, I bet you what you often see is some sort of random pattern. Heads, tails, tails, heads, heads, tails, or tails, heads, tails, heads, heads, tails, right? I mean, it's usually some sort of random pattern. That's what you see most often. So because of those things being what you see or are exposed to most often, you tend to skew the way you think about probability. Can you see how that affects you on a normal everyday basis? How because you might be only exposed to a certain number of things or a certain underrepresentation of things, that might influence what you think is likely to occur? Imagine being exposed to certain news channels that only give you a particular perspective on an issue or a particular perspective on certain people, certain types of people, that you might now have a skewed sense for those people, right? If all and back in the day, and this in some extent still exists, right? TV shows and films always had dark-skinned people doing the crime, right? Committing the criminal act in the films. Well, can you see how that might skew how people see the chance of being attacked by certain types of people? This availability bias is something that we fall prey to all the time, even unconsciously. I mean, you can think about how some people flinch and grab their items tighter, or grab their child's hand a little tighter when they see a certain type of people, because based upon what they're shown, right, in TV and certain news channels, they start to get the sense that there's a greater chance of something bad happening with those people than there are of other people. It's the availability bias. Survey number 2, I had you think about this. Which one would you buy? For most people in our class, they would buy number 1, right? They would choose option number 1, especially because that book is the only thing that's required. I asked you survey number 6. Which one would you buy? In our class, what most often happens is we get a lot more people picking number 3. Well, wait a minute. Look at survey number 2. Okay. Look at survey number 3. Is there a difference in how much you're spending? The price difference between the textbook only and textbook and workbook is the same. The price difference is the same. Yet, more people would choose option 3 in survey 6. Why is that? Well, it's because possibly of what's happening here, that you see that the workbook alone costs $120, and that influences you to think option number 3 is actually a good deal, even though the strict data of it all doesn't really change between survey 2 and survey 6. This is referred to as the anchoring or frame bias. And we talked about this before in our class, that we often make choices or form opinions based on how information is framed rather than the objective facts themselves. It's about context. Put things in a certain context, and that influences how we think about the info. So think about a menu, okay? Let's say there's a menu, we'll call it menu number 1, that has a sandwich for $9.99 and then another sandwich for $15.99. You have another menu that has the same sandwich for $9.99, the same second sandwich for $15.99, but they're going to add one more sandwich number 3 for $30. Okay? So, which menu would sell more option number 2s? The second menu would sell sandwich 2 more than the first menu, even though nothing has changed about either sandwich 1 or sandwich 2 for both. Why would we have more people buying sandwich number 2? Is because sandwich number 3 frames sandwich number 2 to seem like not such a high price, right? Sandwich number 3, that cost of $30, makes it seem as if sandwich number 2 isn't that expensive. So instead of looking at the objective facts, that influences us psychologically. We're not thinking carefully. We might say to ourselves, hey, look, good bargain, $15.99, because the other sandwich is $30. But that's irrational, right? So smart business people will have within their menu maybe an item or 2 that are kind of outrageous in price, just to make everything else seem not so expensive. Kind of a tricky thing, isn't it? Or kind of a manipulative sort of thing. Take a look at survey number 1. Okay, a new medical procedure has a death rate of 7% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? In our class, quite a few people would say, no, I would not recommend it. Look at survey number 8. Yes or no? A new medical procedure has a survival rate of 93% within 5 years. Would you recommend it to patients? More people would say yes for survey number 8 versus survey number 1. But why would more people say yes, considering that the statistics are the same? Death rate of 7% means the same thing as survival rate of 93%. So why would more people say yes for the latter and not as many people would say yes for the first option? It's because of how the question is framed. The term death rate doesn't sound very good. The term survival rate sounds better. So even though the data, the statistics are the same, the framing influences us. And we might even rationalize it. Somebody asks you, hey, so why would you pick that? You may even rationalize it, may come up with the reason why your choice is, logical, but it turns out it may not be. It could be the result of some sort of psychological impulse, some sort of heuristic. It turns out for a lot of us, we have these cognitive biases that show a lot of our thinking is based upon heuristics. And we learned about this in the ordinary world, right? Heuristics refer to these shortcuts. There's these ways in which we make quick decisions, right? So you can think of them as these unconscious rules that our minds use to make choices without thinking too hard. Because we have tons of choices in our life to make. Every second of our day is a choice. I mean, it's a choice to do something or not to do something, right? So we're always confronted with choices. In order to live effectively and even to live at all, we have to learn how to make choices fast without overanalyzing. So we have these heuristics. And these heuristics are often, emotional. They're often intuitive. They're the impulse to make a choice this way versus that way. Well, if that's how we normally think, if that's how we normally make decisions, can you see why there would be an issue with how we deal with all the ideas and possibilities in our heads? Okay, let's take a look at a couple more surveys. So survey number 3, which one would you buy? Textbook 25 or textbook 15 minutes away, 15? Usually quite a number of people would drive the 15 minutes to get the textbook at 15, saving $10. Okay? Survey number 7, which should you pick? Would you stay at the store and buy the 455 suit, or would you drive 15 minutes away to buy the 445 suit? Most people in our class would not drive. Most people in our classes would say, no, I'll stay here and buy the 455 suit. Take a look at the objective facts in both cases, though. In this case, for survey number 7, you are staying where you are instead of driving 15 minutes to save $10. But in survey number 3, most people decided to drive 15 minutes away in order to save $10. What's the difference? Why do people drive 15 minutes away to save $10 here, but they wouldn't drive 15 minutes away to save $10 here? It's irrational, right? How we often think about it is $10 doesn't seem like a big savings when compared to the overall price of the suit. It doesn't feel like a deal. Again, feel. It doesn't feel like a deal. That's why we often don't do it. But if you think rationally, what should you be thinking about? You should be thinking about time and money. 15 minutes away, save $10. That's really the question to ask yourself, not if it's a good deal, right? It feels like a good deal at the bookstore, but not a good deal here. Well, that's feeling, that's emotion. That's not reason, right? Reason says here that 15 minutes of your time is worth $10. For some reason, you don't have the same rationale here. This is one of the reasons why, if you're trying to sell something, you put the word free in it, and you're more likely to sell it because people have that emotional reaction to free. They get excited about it, think it's a good deal just when somebody says free. So if you have an advertisement that says 2 pairs of socks for $4, and then another advertisement that says free pair of socks with purchase of first pair at $4. Which wording would sell more socks? It's the one with the word free in it. Not because of logic, but because we have a heuristic. We have the shortcut. We have this emotional response when it comes to the word free. So when we take a look at our puzzles, especially the puzzle in our mind, trying to fit all the things we have to do together to make sense in life and in your project, how do you normally approach all those ideas? How do you normally approach all the possible choices and actions you can take to get to where you want to go in life? Well, oftentimes we don't approach it very carefully, very rationally. We don't often think and strategize about what to do next to get to where we want to go, right? A lot of us don't have the wherewithal to, let's find the edges of the puzzle. Let's group the puzzle pieces in like colors. A lot of us don't think carefully about our own lives that way. We often think about in terms of heuristics, shortcuts, what feels right now. Go based off impulse. Let's try this piece with that piece. That feels good. It doesn't work. What does my next intuition tell me? Okay, let's get that piece. Let's get this piece. Let's fit together. And you're not really thinking, you're not really approaching taking action in a very logical way. It's just what feels good to do. it's basically off of impulse, which is why some people have, if they feel like a mess, because they have absolute freedom. There's no strategy to guide them, right? There's no strategy that says what to do next. So their minds and their lives end up looking like this because absolute freedom turns into a mess when there's nothing restricting you or guiding you what to do. And this is what happens to us when we get into that disorder phase of the creative process. When we venture out beyond the ordinary world, well, now we don't have to follow mom and dad's rules about how to hang the pants or where to put the shirts and where to put the socks, right? We don't have to follow those rules anymore, which feels free. You can explore, you can play around, but then life can be messy as a result. Your mind can get messy as a result. Absolute freedom turns it into a mess. Challenging assumptions, playing with ideas, it could feel very messy. So it should make sense now why it often feels like this in our heads, dealing with life, because there's so many things you could do with yourself or dealing with your projects, because there's so many ideas that you're not sure where to start or how you should approach it, right? It makes sense because we don't often think carefully about what the best way to approach things are. What would be useful is if we had a strategy, if we had a plan, right? Just like with the puzzle pieces. Let's organize all the colors. Let's get the edges of the board. Oh, how about let's put all the hats here. Let's put all the belts here. Let's make this the dedicated shoe rack. Let's make this the pants rack, right? You have that structure, then it's easy to organize yourself. If you have that sort of structure and game plan for your ideas, your mind won't feel so messy. If you have that sort of order and structure for your life and what guiding principles, life won't feel so messy. So as we go through the creative process, we're supposed to destroy our structures. Isn't that what Picasso told us to do? Every act of creation is an act of destruction. You destroy those structures. Okay, so if you destroy those structures, what's supposed to guide your decisions? What's supposed to guide your choices? Right? If you decided to let go of what mom and dad tell you in terms of how to organize your closet, then how are you supposed to organize your closet? Right? If you let go of what culture is telling you about how to live your life and what it means to be happy, then how do you live your life? How do you live a happy life? If you let go of your idea of how a good song is supposed to sound like or how a good painting is supposed to look like, then what does guide your ideas to create a painting? What does guide your ideas in how to write a song? Well, think about that then. Where would that come from? Where would the structure and the plan and the organization come from? Well, it's now up to you. One of the things about the creative process is about you being authentic, about you making the choice of what you want, right? But that means you need to have a picture of what you want. You need to have a choice of where you want to go. Obviously, in life and in your project for our class. You have to at least have a vision for it. And that would have been helpful, wouldn't it? For the puzzles? Wouldn't it have been helpful if you had a goal in mind? If you knew where you were trying to go with the puzzles? Wouldn't that have helped you game plan and organize and strategize how to put the pieces together? Well, the same thing goes for your life and for the projects. You need to have a sense for where you want to go. For a lot of people, though, the problem is that they're worried that where they want to go may not be good for them or may not be the right place. But in some sense, that's not even important, is it? Because if you have a vision, then you can start. Then it moves you. And just like we've talked about with the rest of the process, it's iterative. You have a vision, you try it out, you figure out it doesn't work, then you adjust. And that may lead you to an even better place, to an even more interesting vision for your life and your project. But this seems to be of utmost importance. Having a clear sense, a clear goal, a clear intention. What is it that you value? What is it that you really want for your projects? What is it that you want to make? What's the end result feel like, if not look like, for you? You need that first, at the very least, in order to start organizing your thoughts. Because now you can organize them in a way that gets you to a certain picture of your projects, of your life. So how do you do this normally? I mean, how do you organize your thoughts normally? Like, do you have any strategies that you've done to deal with psychic disorder? I mean, some people have to-do lists. Some people have schedules, right? Some people they use calendars, right? There's lots of ways in which you can organize your thoughts, organize your actions. And if you can get over the idea that it has to be right, that your list has to be good, if you can get over the idea that your list has to be perfect or your strategy has to be perfect, well, then you can have a strategy, work on it, it guides you, gives you structure on moving, and then you adjust based upon the feedback from you trying to make it happen. Because if it doesn't work out, you'll find out, and then you make the adjustment, right? It turns out, though, that a lot of this can happen naturally. It turns out, though, that a lot of this our brain kind of does naturally. And this natural sort of way of dealing with psychic disorder is referred to as a flow state. So next lecture, we'll talk about dealing with motivation, how to overcome complacency, and how flow states would be useful for those too.